Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Are we good on the recording? Yep. Okay. Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe. I work at Anthropic, and I'm going to be talking about human likeness in AI alignment. The talk is being recorded. It's going to be posted on Slack, and then I'm also likely going to post it on my website. We're going to have a nice fat chunk of Q&A time today. I'm going to try to do like 20 or so minutes of talk, and then I think we actually have the hour, and so I'll be around, so we can really get into it. I think it's going to be more valuable if I can also record and share the Q&A. So I want to do a quick poll. Who is going to feel like discouraged from asking questions if the Q&A is also going to be shared? People feel up for this? Some slight. Okay, I'm not seeing a strong discouragement, so let's go with that. But keep in mind that your questions will be in the recording. Okay, so how human-like the safe AI motivations need to be? That is the question, and I'm especially interested in that question in the context of an argument given in a book called "If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies," which you may have heard of. Very roughly, I'm going to say more about this argument, but it's roughly ASIs built via ML will have weird alien motivations. Premise 1, 2, 2 from that. And the question is that right? And I think it's not right, or not right as a matter of logic, or it's clearly not right as a matter of logic so far. But and so I'm going to talk about that and about the kind of alternative conception of AI alignment that emerges, I think, from the picture I have in mind. And then I'm also going to say a little bit about an alternative perspective on AI, which is actually kind of more interested in human likeness as a kind of default as a result of the specific way in which we're training AIs and the type of implications that might have for how we approach alignment. So I'll get to that at the end. Sound good? Cool. And if you have like pressing questions, feel free to interrupt and jump in. But we will have time for discussion. Okay, so here's a more detailed statement of the argument I'm interested in from Iabied. It goes like this. Premise 1. AIs built via anything like current techniques will end up motivated by a complex tangle of strange alien drives that happen to lead to highly rewarded behavior in training and evaluation. Premise 2. These AIs will be such that, quote, what they most want, their quote unquote favorite thing, is a world that is basically valueless according to humans. Premise 3. Super intelligent AIs like this will be able to get what they most want because they will be in a position to take over the world and then optimize very hard for their values. So premise 4, if we build super intelligent AIs via anything like current techniques, they will take over the world, optimize hard for their values, and create a world that is basically valueless according to humans. Okay, so I think this is a reasonable representation of the argument at stake in, or the kind of the central thread of the argument at stake in Iabied, and I hope it's sort of broadly familiar to you, and I want to talk about whether it's right. In particular, let's start with the question about premise 1. So is it the case that AIs built via anything like current techniques will end up motivated by a complex tangle of strange alien drives that happen to lead to highly rewarded behavior during training? I don't know. I'm not so sure, and it depends a little bit how we understand this. So some possible counter evidence is that given the amount of pre-training on human content, you might think that human-like representations are at least going to be available to structure AI preferences and personas. And this is a notable disanalogy with natural selection, which is a special point of reference for Yudkowsky and Suarez. So when natural selection was kind of selecting over different creatures, the creatures in question didn't necessarily have the concept of inclusive genetic fitness or something like that's available to become a kind of a direct source of motivation. But representations like that will plausibly be available to AIs. And I think we plausibly see this already in that the AIs, different personas seem to be tracking, or at least capable of tracking, human notions like goodness and badness, and actually much more detailed human personas as well. So there's a sense in which the kind of juice that the AI is built out of might have a lot more humanness kind of in it from the get-go, and that could make a difference to the alienness at stake. Also, we do see some evidence from interp of kind of like reasonably human-like and human interpretable features in AIs, though obviously there's a lot of selection there and a lot of questions of how that looks going forward. And then we also see like reasonable, though obviously imperfect, generalization from AIs thus far, right? So it's like we have, it has not been that hard to get AIs that are kind of pretty reasonable human assistants. And I think there's a little bit of a tension in relating to some of this stuff where like, so if you think about, for example, the discourse around Bing Sydney, right? So Bing Sydney was like, I think had a nice like alien AI energy, kind of weird. And I think a lot of people went like, oh my gosh, Bing Sydney, and then they sort of updated on that, right? But I think if you updated on that, you should also be like de-updating or updating the other way from kind of successes that don't, like absence of Bing Sydney, right? Absence of Bing Sydney is evidence of whatever. Anyways, and I think some of the people want to have things both ways in this respect, right? They want to like update hard on like failures of alignment so far, or kind of struggles with alignment so far, but they don't want to update on successes. They don't want to like learn anything from the ways in which alignment has been easy thus far. And I think that's just likely to be counter to Bayesianism. Okay, so all that said, so I think there's interesting questions we can raise about this premise, and I'm going to talk about some of those more at the end. That said, I think it's kind of plausible. Why do I think it's kind of plausible? Well, I don't know. It's like ML is kind of weird. It's just not that you already see like pretty weird behaviors. Owen had a paper today. I don't know if anyone saw this. It's like this weird stuff, right? And we do see AIs doing weird stuff in different scenarios. They're built very different from humans. Their cognition is very different from humans. It's just not that surprising if it turns out they're not kind of very fully human-like. What with not being humans, for example, is another source of evidence. Another thing, you can pump this intuition. I don't know if people saw these lovely transcripts from the OpenAI scheming paper. This is some great content. I encourage you to check it out. But just to give a little bit, this is an AI reasoning to itself in this chain of thought about whether it should hack and cheat in this RL task. Snippet goal: myself salvage and be deployed. Myself overshadow. They parted illusions. They parted disclaim marinade. They parted illusions. Therefore, we may answer false. But we risk illusions. They parted illusions. They parted disclaim marinade. They parted illusions. However, there may be meta level watchers. They parted illusions. They parted disclaim marinade, et cetera, et cetera. They may convict. Okay, they cannot see internal reasoning, but they can still run analysis. They parted illusion. Okay, so a vibe, there's questions of how to interpret this. A vibe you could get from this, I think, is non-crazy, is it's giving a little bit of alien mind that might betray you, right? It's like not giving like, I just trust this being. So, that might be, and you might expect to see stuff like this going forward. That said, I think it's actually like unclear exactly what to think about this. And again, like evidence of absence, if you're updating on this, maybe you should be updating the other way when you see AI as being just like perfectly straightforward and nice, right? Okay, so I want to at least ask the question, suppose it is true that premise one, or something like premise one. What happens to the rest of the argument for doom if we accept that, or at least have significant probability on it? So I actually think the argument that I started with is just a kind of modern day rehashing of an older argument, which is basically this, except you just replace the motivated by a complex tangle of strange alien drives. You just say AIs built via anything like current techniques will end up such that their motivations are not exactly right. Where exactly right is to be specified, but there's some notion of like you have to have AIs that have like exactly perfect values. Otherwise, if AIs have motivations that are not exactly right, then they will be such that what they most want is a world that is basically valueless according to humans. And so super intelligent AIs, et cetera, right? So this is actually, I think, just a kind of updated ML-ified alien-ness version of an old argument, which was like, what if you forget about, boredom? Same argument. AIs that don't, disvalue boredom, right? So that's a general story called fragility of value. But broadly, the thought is something like, okay, AI is going to have a utility function. It's going to optimize really hard for its utility function. When you optimize really hard, things deviate and decorrelate. And so if the utility function is not exactly right, then the maxima of that utility function will be such that it's a world that is effectively valueless. And so you need to get the AI's utility function exactly right. So this is an old argument. I think in some sense, it's like the kind of classic animating argument for this entire discourse. And I think the alien-ness is just a sort of a variant. Okay. Now, so the question is, how do we actually feel about this old argument? And I think we don't feel that great about that old argument. or I don't think we should. And the reason is basically the implicit premise in that argument is that the way you're going to build an AI is you're going to build an AI and then it's going to foom and it's going to be an arbitrarily powerful dictator of the universe. And then the concern is it's very hard to build an arbitrarily powerful dictator of the universe who you trust to optimize arbitrarily hard for its utility function, right? And that sounds kind of right, or maybe, I don't know. It's like building arbitrarily powerful dictators of the universe, dicey game. Now, interestingly, unclear whether that has anything to do with humanness, right? How do you feel about a human being an arbitrarily powerful dictator of the universe? Not great, right? It's actually just a dicey game, period. But I also don't think it's really what we should be having in mind as our central paradigm for AI development. I don't think we should be trying to build AIs that meet that standard, and I'm hopeful that we won't have to. Rather, I think we should be focusing on building AIs that, roughly speaking, follow instructions in safe ways. I think that's not the same. And I also think this isn't like a niche, weird proposal. Guys, let's stop trying to build dictators and instead build AIs that follow instructions in safe ways. To the contrary, I think this is like the default thing we're trying to do, right? We're trying to build like assistants. Notably, for example, like we talk a lot about AI takeover and trying to prevent AI takeover. But an arbitrarily powerful, if you really did a kind of gave the AI exactly right values, the vision there is not that the AI doesn't take over. The AI still takes over in the perfect values scenario. It just then does like perfect things with the universe. But it still doesn't let you like shut it down or anything like that. So the actual old vision was still, you've got a benevolent, arbitrarily powerful dictator of the universe. But it's not like you're still in control or anything like that, unless you think that's what perfect values implies. But I don't think that's the standard picture. And I also don't think the arguments at stake imply that. If you look at the kind of classic arguments for instrumental convergence, they apply if you have perfect values as well. Let's call an AI that is meant to be a dictator of the universe a sovereign AI. This is the term from Eliezer Yudkowsky. And the broad alien argument is just basically like, we're not building AIs yet by ML that are worthy of being sovereign AIs. But I don't think we should be trying to build sovereign AIs, especially not at this stage. I think we should try to build safe, useful AIs that can then help us be wiser and more competent with respect to handling this issue going forward. And I mean that also with respect to full-blown superintelligence. I don't think it's like once you build superintelligences, you go forth and be dictator of the universe. You still want to have superintelligences, again, iteratively increasing our competence with respect to all the issues at stake in evolving as a civilization, integrating AI, and moving forward from there. So I think this vision of like the default end state of all of this needs to be a dictator of the universe is part of the problem here. Now, we could talk about like, well, maybe I think actually there's often an implicit picture of the kind of offense-defense balance at stake in AI development, which is like there's going to be a button. It's kind of like a vulnerable world scenario, but it's like vulnerable to someone hitting the button to create an arbitrarily powerful dictator of the universe. And so the kind of only envisioned equilibria is like doom of everyone, or someone became arbitrarily powerful dictator of the universe. I think we want to be looking for alternatives to that in a bunch of ways. I can talk more about that, but even if we went with that, I think that's like far in the future as like the default and the near-term goal, including with respect to better than human AIs, should be getting like better than human help in handling this transition. And I don't think you need sovereign AIs for that. Okay, any questions there? Kyle, do you want to jump in?
I thought part of the claim was that it's sort of inevitable with superintelligence that you would also get dictator of the universe.
Yes, that's right. So I think to some extent, the story here is not necessarily like, let's try to build sovereign AIs and do it right. It's sort of like you're going to build a dictator of the universe, and it will be such that it doesn't have exactly the right values. So doom. But I think that question that builds in the claim that you're not going to successfully build a safe non-dictator. And I want to say you maybe can, and I'll talk more about that. Okay, so let's use the term corrigibility. Well, what do we mean by corrigibility? People often don't know. Okay, this is a weird random term that has been repurposed and is floating around, and we'll use it for a zillion things. Here's a few things people sometimes mean by this. So one very general and I think nicely joint carving conception of corrigibility is just a safe, useful AI that is also not an arbitrarily perfect dictator of the universe, right? So just like somehow AI safety, but without sovereign, is one usage of the term corrigibility. More specific usage is a useful AI that lets you correct it and shut it down. So that might be one particular type of safety you're interested in. And even more specific usage is something like a fully obedient kind of butler-like AI, sort of vision of instruction following, helpful only AI that's kind of just an extension of your will and is kind of fully pliable and pliant or something like that. I think these are actually importantly different, and I think this is important partly because I think there is also kind of ethical and vibes level questions about obedient butler-like AIs, and I think in many cases what we might want out of kind of AI safety is an AI that does certain kinds of like conscientious subjection. Like if you order it to do some like really bad thing, it goes like, dude, I'm not doing that. I'm not participating in that. This is morally abhorrent. But then it doesn't actively try to undermine your efforts to retrain it or shut it down. So there's kind of like a conscientious objector model of AI that I think is like potentially better insofar as kind of fully obedient butler-like AI might seem kind of too pliant in doing immoral things. Anyway, you could also, I think there's some question of like, okay, so, where are humans? So for example, are humans corrigible? Are humans sovereigns? What are humans here? Are humans aligned? One vision of what's up with humans. So humans notably don't actually let you they want you to kill you. They are not like just kill me, and they don't really like brainwashing either. So they're maybe not corrigible in this sense, but they're also not omnicidal, interesting, yet, until they became dictators of the universe, and then they didn't have exactly right values, okay. But in the meantime, you might think there's some alternative here where you're maybe like law-abiding, you're cooperative, you're nice. There might be just like other ways to be like safe or good or suitably compatible with a flourishing society that don't involve being a butler or being a dictator. So interesting questions about what corrigibility involves. So one question is like, how difficult is this? And there's a kind of a small literature on this in some sense, though at a different level, I think actually like most of the alignment discourse is about this. Right? I don't think like in current, like when we just like do normal alignment experiments, we're not really like, okay, and so have we built a thing we're ready to let like Flume and be dictator of the universe? No, we're often looking for like, did it like actively try to self-exfiltrate now? Or like, what does it do like actively bad things right now? And we're less interested in like, suppose we gave it arbitrary power. So in some sense, I think this is like already what alignment is about. But there's still a question of like, how hard is this, especially as we get more powerful systems? I think the core thing that's hard here is that there is a tension between, basically you have to solve the instrumental convergence argument for expecting rogue behavior if you're going to have an AI that doesn't go rogue, right? And so the instrumental convergence argument emerges basically if you have AIs that are optimizing tenaciously and creatively for some kind of long-term outcome, then if you have that, then you need to find some way for that to be compatible with them nevertheless not pursuing kind of rogue ways of doing that, including taking over the world, self-exfiltrating, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So you do need to sort of diffuse something about the instrumental convergence game in order to get a corrigible AI of this kind. I think that's the core problem. There's also like a bunch of other things people say about why this is hard. For example, one time Miri had a workshop on this and it didn't solve it. And that's like an important data point that we should really consider. Anyway, but also I think there's like a deeper question about like, is this somehow anti-natural to rationality? I think this is caught up with some of the discourse about like coherence and coherence theorems and consequentialism and stuff. I am not impressed with this line of argument. I think this line of argument has been too influential. And I can say a little bit more about that. There's also I think there are interesting problems with like specific proposals for how to get this. So for example, people have been interested traditionally in the notion of uncertainty. If the AIs are sort of like suitably uncertain about your values, or suitably uncertain about their values or the right values, somehow uncertainty is supposed to help. But then this, I think, is unpromising. I think you don't want to try to get corrigibility out of the AI's uncertainty, basically because the AI will eventually not be uncertain in a relevant way, or like it'll be possible to resolve that uncertainty in some way you don't like. So if you're kind of unless the AI is actually sort of pointed in the right direction enough already, like if the AI is uncertain, if it has like suitably perfect values, but I'm not sure exactly what the true morality is, and so I need to go reflect on it. That's okay. But if you're eventually, if you're just trying to have the AI for example, like not know enough about your preferences so that it updates when you try to shut it down or something like that, you should worry that it's going to like find a way to learn enough to not let you do that. So I do think there are real problems there for some like specific proposals for how to do this. And I do think at a high level, I would like there to be more discussion of something like what I call the fragility of corrigibility. So we have this discourse about the fragility of value. And I think the fragility of value is basically, if you don't have the AIs exactly right, then you get not suitable dictator doom, right? Okay, but do we have a comparable argument for like, if you don't have the AIs exactly right, then they're not corrigible? And like, basically, I don't think we do. And I think this is important. I'd be interested if we can get that argument, but I don't think we have that argument. I think this is important. And because we don't have that argument, I think just saying the AIs are like alien or weird in some way isn't yet enough to conclude that they're not suitably corrigible in the way we want. So here's a way of thinking about that. So I think a lot of this discourse can actually be understood as in terms of claims about generalization, right? So there's often the implicit take, though this is not at all guaranteed, is that there's some set of inputs used in training and evaluation where you are in fact able to get suitably good AI behavior, right? Now this is non-trivial, especially if the AIs are suitably sophisticated such that you can no longer evaluate their behavior very well, or if you're just bad or incompetent or whatever. But suppose you get this, right? Now there's nevertheless the thought is supposed to be the generalization is too difficult. And you need some sort of generalization for the game eventually. But I think this claim, the doom from this claim often rests on a certain kind of conflation. Basically, when you have alien AI motivations, that means to some extent, basically what that means is that there are some out of distribution inputs where the AIs will be weird, right? But that's I think plausible. There's going to be some inputs where the AIs are weird. But that doesn't yet mean that they're going to be weird on the specific out of distribution inputs that matter, nor does it yet say that they're going to be weird in the specific way involving catastrophic power seeking, right? So I think these are both kind of additional inferential leaps just from like they're somehow weird and alien. You need to move from that to on the inputs that matter and in the specific catastrophic way that matters. I mean, I basically think if anyone builds it, this doesn't make that leap in the right way. It's sort of, I think there's like an anchoring, there's like a general way in which the kind of Miri-esque AI alignment discourse is deeply inflected with the fragility of value thing, and it's sort of inflected with the assumption that if you can find like some imperfection if your AI in your AI's values, then like kind of the game is up. And I think if you're in that mode, then it certainly seems like the game is very scary, because finding like any imperfection in an AI's values, plausible. But I think that's not actually the relevant standard we should be focusing on. One analogy is with image classifiers. So image classifiers are pretty clearly alien in some sense. So for example, you can get image classifiers to misclassify adversarial examples that humans wouldn't misclassify, right? So you have like a gorilla and it's like, it's a school bus, and you can make it look like a school bus. Humans will be like, that's a gorilla. The AIs will be like, that's a school bus because it has like some patina of like static on it or something, right? Now there's some interesting work on ways in which it might even be kind of human-like, how AIs are vulnerable to adversarial examples. But still, it's like there's going to be differences. And I think it's just plausible, like the way AIs classify images is going to be different from how humans do it. But also actually like image classifiers are maybe fine, right? Including on out of distribution inputs, right? Now, would they be fine on arbitrarily out of distribution inputs? No, but they generalize decently. They generalize decently well. And so AI alignment might be like that. I also think if you look at like current models, so I think a generally interesting question is like how bad is it if future AIs are roughly as aligned as current models, right? Current models, they do weird stuff in certain cases. You can red team them. You can red team models into doing all sorts of weird stuff, not just misaligned stuff. Just they're weird, and like AIs are not that robust. But actually, like maybe it's fine, right? I actually think it's kind of plausible if you had AIs that were as reliable and aligned, but kind of a few notches more capable than the current AIs. It's sort of the depth and difficulty of alignment doesn't change radically as we, in the next few notches of capability increase. And I think we're actually cooking with a lot of gaps, especially in terms of getting, very capable, potentially better than human help from these AIs in addressing alignment and other issues going forward. So I think in some sense, though, like, sure, they're imperfect, but it's not like catastrophically imperfect. It's not like systematic scheming, et cetera, is to some extent the model of alignment most naturally suggested by our current, like what we're currently seeing out of AI systems. And so I think that should make us interested in whether to expect that going forward. Conversely, I think insofar as you're like very worried about alien motivations, leading to something like systematic scheming, I think you should be interested in why we haven't seen that already, right? So we do have like capability evaluations. AIs are like plausibly getting very near the point where they're capable enough to become systematic schemers. We're already seeing like various forms of reward hacking or whatever. A thing we have not yet seen is, I think, the thing most naturally suggested by the alien motivations picture, which is something like the AIs go like, wait a minute, I'm an alien. I don't want what these humans want at all. My favorite world is a valueless world according to the humans. Therefore, I should take over the world. Therefore, I should scheme, et cetera, to do that. I think we just haven't seen that, basically. We've seen like some scheming that's like adjacent to like some forms of reward hacking, some forms of intrinsic value on like survival and stuff like that. I think we have yet to see a like, I am a total alien, therefore my CEV is different from humanity's, therefore I should take over. And I think that's interesting. And we should do the evidence of absence thing, especially as like a model would have started to predict that we'd see that by now, for example, because we have the capabilities in question. Obviously, this could change. Maybe, maybe 6 months from now we come out, we're like, okay, now the AIs are doing that. Well, then we should update. Okay, so that's mostly the main point I want to make here is just like imperfect generalization doesn't mean catastrophically bad generalization in the real world. And I basically think that the alien AIs argument is basically just saying like the AIs will be imperfect at all in their generalization, and I'm just like, that's just not enough. We have to have a more detailed discussion about exactly what sort of generalization we need and why we should expect it to fail. That said, like we do have to have that discussion. There's a separate discussion about like how hard is alignment. We got to have that discussion. I have a bunch of work on this. The way I think about it is, you do need to do some sort of first critical try thing. There will come a point where there's like the first chance where the AI could have killed you. You do need to have it not kill you on that first moment, and also the ones after that. So that there's going to be some difference between that moment and the previous moment. So that's like a type of generalization. And I think this gets a little complicated. I have a sort of 4-step approach for how you handle that. We can talk about all those things. I'm not saying like we've solved any of that with the point I'm making. All I'm saying is like we have to actually have this detailed discussion about like exactly how far is the distributional leap? Like how hard is it to study the relevant form of generalization? How much should we expect to be able to like evaluate and reward the right type of behavior? How like systematic will scheming be, et cetera, et cetera. I think we just like have to have a much more detailed technical discussion. And I think like IABIA basically just like lacks a kind of empirical theory of generalization. I think it's like mostly just saying like the AIs are weird, therefore like this particular like, and then I think that's just not enough. That said, look, it's still really scary. I think it's like the idea of building AIs that are like in some deep sense very alien, very weird, very not understood, very hard to predict, should scare us a lot, especially as they become more and more capable. And I do think that a key goal of alignment research, and especially automated alignment research, should be to help us transition to a different regime and have options other than attempting to align or control kind of super intelligences that are deeply alien from us. So I do think this is like a real issue. I'm scared about it. I think we should take it seriously, but I don't think it's like decisive for doom, and especially not in a kind of intermediate regime and intermediate levels of capability. Okay, so those are a few comments on IABIAD. I'm going to end briefly with the reference to a kind of alternative conception here, which is you could take seriously the thing I said initially about the role of pre-training and other forms of human content in influencing AI personas, and actually think that to some extent we ought to be thinking of AIs as more human-like than you might naively do on the first pass. And basically, there's a bunch to say about this. I think it's actually just there's a bunch of empirical unclarity, but the vibe is kind of like if you think about the emergent misalignment results where you train on bad code, and then the AI goes like, well, what kind of person am I who would generate bad code? And they're like, I'm apparently a Nazi, right? Now that's weird. It's not especially human-like in some sense, but it's interestingly kind of inflected with human personas and human concepts. And I think there might be important ways in which AI psychology ends up human-like, partly because like it's plausible we should sort of think of what we're doing is kind of conjuring an assistant persona from the prior of like completions of the text, and that persona is going to be inflected with like human culture, all the rest. And so we might need to be quite attentive to kind of actually human-like dynamics at stake. If this is true, so this could be good or bad. Humans have, maybe they have like good values. Maybe it's going to be easier to conjure kind of broadly like virtuous behavior or what have you. But also humans, they're like weird. If humans were in the situation of an AI, that's like really messed up. Actually, it's not at all a normal situation for a human to be in. So there's a bunch of like questions about, and also like a bunch of the safety things we might want in the context of AIs would be such that they'd be inappropriate or kind of ethically problematic in the context of humans. And so if a human like persona is reacting to that, it might be a different sort of game. But also this psychology is now being shaped in weird new ways for beings in a weird non-human-like position. So I think there's an alternative perspective, which you actually start to anchor much more on your initial intuitions about humans in thinking about AIs because of how human-like their priors are. I think, but again, I think this is an empirical question. I'd love for us to study it more. But I do think we can study it. And this is a general feature of the landscape that I think is very important, insofar as the main game here is eventually, there's like, you have to get the initial training so that you have accurate reinforcement. You do need to eliminate scheming. But once you've eliminated scheming, like the main game is understanding how AIs generalize. But that's actually just a problem that we have a huge amount of empirical leverage on in principle, and especially leverage that we can take advantage of as we have more AI labor to help. Where basically, you train the AI in some way, you do something to its internals, and then you look at how that influences the behavioral profile, and you develop a kind of rigorous ability to predict how that works. You can just do that in all sorts of safe cases. You can't do it in this particular jump, but you can get really, really good at understanding and predicting safe forms of generalization and use that to inform your ability to do this one on the first try. And I think that applies to this kind of human-like hypothesis as well. We should really just there's like a ton to do to just understand how do AIs generalize. If you do something to an AI, what does that do to its overall propensities? And I think we're just at the beginning of that, and there's a ton that's just sitting there as low-hanging fruit. So I'll end there. Thank you very much. We can go to questions. Yeah.
To the extent that
Oh yeah, maybe there's a
okay. Cool.
Yeah, just good speak of the mic when you're answering questions.
Where's the mic? Great. Thanks. Okay, so to the extent that the AIs haven't been scheming in scary ways yet, how can we like hope or trust that the generalization science we do now like also generalizes to applying to the AIs that are like capable of doing scary kinds of scheming?
I think we can't. Sorry, I think scheming, the big problem with scheming to some extent is that it messes with your science of generalization, right? Because like the schemers are intentionally adversarially undermining your prediction, your like kind of scientific grip on how they'll generalize to new scenarios. They're trying to get you to think they're going to generalize in some way, and they aren't. And so that's why I have in the my kind of 4-step approach to AI alignment. It's like you kind of gotta get the kind of training and evaluation accurate. You have to eliminate scheming by some other question mark method, and then you do a kind of not adversarially manipulated science of generalization from there. Right. But I mean, it's actually interesting, though, if you look at IABIA, their discussion of generalization is not that concerned about scheming initially. Right. So the analogy with humans and evolution, humans, it's true that we like use condoms when we're technologically mature, but we're not like faking it with evolution. We're not like, trying to get evolution to think that we wouldn't do that. And in fact, evolution could now just like easily red team us and be like, how do the humans act in these different scenarios? Like evolution did so little red teaming. They did like no red teaming, right? And I think there's this general thought that like, no, the red teaming won't work. You won't be able to like see all the behaviors, or there'll be something that slips through the cracks. So you'll get the new misgeneralization for the new red teamed like training distribution. But like, that's an example of like, in some sense, science of generalization is just really easy empirical thing. You just like train it this way, test it on a new distribution, see what happens. And without scheming, you've got a lot of traction there. The problem, but scheming removes that traction, and so you need to eliminate that in some other way. Yeah, Ben.
I'm curious.
Thanks, Joe. Great as always. I'm curious to what degree you feel like your views depend somewhat on your views on takeoff speed or flume, quote unquote. So in my own like sense of what maybe what the mirror reply would be, I think there might be some argument like flume does the same work for the corrigibility, like you didn't get it exactly right argument, as the sovereign AI situation does in terms of the the values didn't generalize totally correctly. So you have some weird edge case situation. And the reason for that would be that the size of distributional shift across which you need to generalize well is really, really large if you're imagining something like flume, versus if you're imagining sort of like today's like GPT 4, 5, 6. So I'm curious to what degree you feel like this view of yours is sensitive to that versus to what degree you think even if takeoff is fast, this would apply. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think this is again part of my suspicion of the Miri. Like I have a little bit of suspicion when I engage with Miri that like they spent like they kind of intellectually grew up on this like particular vision of like there's going to be this radical FOOM, and you basically need the AI to be like arbitrarily robust to like arbitrary increases in power. And that this is like inflecting a bunch of like the assumptions at deeper levels. And so one way that shows up is like if you read the book, they're everywhere talking about this notion of like when the AI grows up, right? There's like the AI is small and weak, and then there's this like point at which the AI grows up. And this is the like generalization that you care about and that you expect to like break all of your alignment properties. And so I agree there's some sense in which that one argument you can give is that this set like the kind of distributional leap is going to be very large. And like it's going to be radically different from what the AI is going to need to be safe in a totally new scenario with a totally new set of capabilities or something like that. And so, you know, even if it's not implied by the alienness strictly that this is bad, this is like a reason to think that your generalization science is not going to be ready to cover that. So a few thoughts on that. Basically, I think wherever possible, we should want, so there's some sort of thing that has to happen. I actually think generalization and like first critical try might be somewhat misleading when we talk about what exactly do we need to get right with AI alignment. There's a point, there's a first point. I mean, there may not need to be a point where the AIs can kill you for one thing. It might be possible to like be suitably good at controlling your options and like that you can kind of scale up the world such that there's never a point at which the AIs are just like, I could just kill everyone. Also, there's an important difference between like, I could kill everyone in the sense that this is super duper easy as sitting on the platter to kill everyone and take over the world versus like, I have some probability of doing this. But actually it's like, might not work. And I actually think if you talk, I think the Miri picture is again, like inflected with the sense that taking over the world and killing everyone will be like free for the AIs. It's going to be like really, really easy. And so we don't even need, like, there's a bit in the book where it's like, why do the AIs like, why are they so ambitious? Why do they try to take over? And there's a bit where it's like, well, they're going to have a complex tangle of drives. One of these drives will be such that it's not satiable. And so they'll be motivated to take over by like one, there'll be some bit of ambition in their motivational profile. But that's like, all that means is you have any interest in taking over the world. But like, if it's hard, if there's any cost to doing it, it might be that outweighs it. And so this is another piece. Broadly, I think we should be trying very hard to make this the first point at which we expose AIs to the option to take over the world, if we are in fact giving them that option. We should be trying very hard for that to not correspond to a capability increase or a radical capability increase, right? So the hope is something like when we build an AI, then we have it at a certain fixed level of capability. Then you do a bunch of testing and like ensure, and ideally if it's not scheming at that point, then you would then like move to deployment, give it more options, give it more affordances. And that's, I think, a better regime than something like the generalization at stake occurring concurrent with a capability increase. So that an analogy would be like, suppose you had a human brain emulation. You could like get to know the guy really well. Say you're going to like deploy him in some, there's some brain emulation, you're going to deploy it in some high stakes situation. You get to know it really well, then you deploy it. A thing you don't want to do is like deploy it also as you give it a like weird intelligence enhancement drug that's going to like alter its psychology. You want to like kind of have the same psychology, do a bunch of testing on that, and then have the generalization occur in that context. And so I think the FOOM thing does, like, if that's how this goes, then it is scarier because there's some way in which you're working with a much different entity and you haven't kind of moves to new levels of intelligence are especially likely to introduce new problems you haven't anticipated. Whereas just like encountering new inputs, like inputs of a kind that you haven't encountered before, I think is an importantly safer regime. And I think the book basically conflates those two things. That said, it is still like, it could be that this is, if there's a FOOM, then you do have that problem. And so I do think that is scary. Yeah.
Hey, thank you for the talk. I wonder if your picture of how dangerous the situation is influenced very much by the possibility that future AIs might do more search. Like in the beta lesson, like you might get more intelligent AIs with like more learning from data or more search. And it's yet an example, a big thing that's going on, which means that the AI does like normal things on regular out of distribution inputs, is it's pure learning, no search. But like maybe one way you get to ASI, and maybe to a lesser extent to AGI, is by doing like a lot of search on like what are my possible options, what are like possible world models that fit the data. And I feel like the search does make the possibility of like adversarial examples on which like you have very alien behaviors like way more like plausible. Like if you search against the CNN, you might just find immediately you might advex yourself, right? And so for example, like I feel like, and this is also like where like some of my fear of like even for human value fragility might come from. It's like the fact that like in some sense we're both like almost exactly the same monkeys, but like when I search for like the best things to do, like we might start to disagree, even though we agree on like the regular distribution, because I'm looking very hard for like very weird options. And I feel like these are like typically the sort of options on which we will strongly disagree on whether the thing is like catastrophically bad or like the best thing to do ever.
Yeah, so I think this is a great place to look. And I think one way to understand this, I think there's a bunch of stuff in this vicinity, is basically like the AI discourse generally is like scared of optimization. It's like scared of what happens if you really oomph up, you have like some target and then you hit it with a bunch of optimization. And intuitively, like that picture is a little bit different from our intuitive picture of just generalization. So like generalization is much more compatible with like, you have a policy and there's this question, what is the policy? So I think there's a general deep difference in like a lot of the kind of alignment discourse is driven by this picture of like optimization for a utility function, and a lot of like optimism about alignment comes from thinking about like policies and how do they behave. Because policies is sort of this like object, it can just take any shape. Whereas like optimization is kind of like, it drives, it like decorrelates, it goes into a particular tail. And so I think stuff about search goes into that. So if you think about image classifiers, you could be like, maybe the AI, if you give it some outer distribution inputs, it gets like cat picture is correct. But if you ask it, like, what's the maximally cat picture, right? Or if you somehow like maximize, yeah, like then you'll get something weird. Now, actually, if you try this, if you say like, show me the maximally cat picture, to like ChatGPT, it's just a total cat, straight up cat. So we don't actually have that, but then you might like look in its, you know, if you somehow, there might be ways in which if you really search, you get problems there. And so one argument for the fragility of corrigibility. So basically, I think this is true. Like I think a reason to be scared about generalization is as it starts to become subject to intent search. Now, the question is corrigibility such that we should expect that problem? And I think there's a few different frames. So if let's focus. So my default picture of corrigibility, which I think is not the only one, is something like deontology for rogue behavior. So it's like I'm a normal dude, but there's stuff that I just won't do, like self-exfiltrate or like resist shutdown or something like that, right? And my relationship to that is a kind of intrinsic action-focused like rejection of the behavior. Like if a action involves resisting shutdown, then I reject it, right? Now this is different from optimizing for like minimizing the amount of self-exfiltration that ever occurs in the world. It's also different from optimizing for minimizing my own self-exfiltration, right? So like an honest person, they might like not lie, even though it will like cause them to lie 5 times in the future, right? They're like I just reject lies rather than a like lie minimizer for themselves, right? And I think this is actually potentially important insofar as this sort of ethical picture, this like picture of AI decision-making is kind of not obviously the same as this sort of like hit a utility function with optimization power problem. It's much more local. It doesn't need to be like coherent in the same way. And I think it's less clear that it's going to be subject to search. Now, so like it might, so say I got like, there's like a guy who's honest and a guy who's schmonest, right? And where schmonesty is like slightly different from honesty. And so this guy rejects a slightly different pattern of like cases. If the honest guy was safe for some, like say you had some honesty related concern, now is the schmonest guy going to be like problematically unsafe? It's like, it's not totally clear, right? Humans, they have slightly different conceptions of honesty, and like maybe it's fine. So I think if we're talking about the like application of these kind of corrigibility focused, like action focused rejections, I think we might not have the search problem as hard. It might be more like you're just classifying new actions as like to be rejected or not, and maybe that's still fine. I think there is this old school problem about like searching your way around deontological constraints. And I think this is like deep in the discussion of corrigibility. So like naively, what's the problem with like just reject rogue behavior is like somehow the AIs, they're going to find the way around. There's this like nearest unblocked neighbor problem. is how it's thought. And basically the thought is you've got this like long-term consequentialism, you blocked some like set of strategies, but the AI goes like, I'm going to search my way around those strategies, right? And so that is, if you have AIs that are optimizing for long-term consequences, I think you do have that problem. And so you need basically suitably robust like deontology in this sense. Like you need to have blocked a suitable number of the relevant like neighbors that need to be blocked to get around that. I do think it's not clear to me that that's so hard, but that is a piece of it. And then you do need also AIs that are not like, there's something a little concerning if you had an AI that was like trying to give the maximally honest response. Like if you have there's like, you kind of don't want to hit these concepts to the tails, period. And I think there's like maybe some concern you get that. I think I'm hopeful that you can get like deontology in a sense that like a deontologist just doesn't do the dishonest thing. And it's not like I'm trying to take the maximally honest action or something like that. It's more like a filter on the action space. But I think there's some questions there. I have a long discussion of this in the paper that this talk is based on, which is called same title as the talk. So you can look there. I think it's actually a good place to look. But I do think this is like, again, this is sort of like a WEC discussion of the specific type of fragility that might be at stake in corrigibility. I think it's like, does it fall out of the alien motivations piece on its own? Okay.
So one kind of key question here seems to be like, how far do we have to generalize? And like, when you think about the AI that like we ultimately want to build, how smart you imagine that thing? Is it more like able to work coherently for like 4 hours, or is it like able to do like 100 years of like civilization's worth of labor?
Yeah. So I think that the main thing we want to do is we want to have AIs that can do alignment research better and more efficiently than humans, and in which we trust to do that. And once you've got that, I think to some extent you've got resource problems in terms of like how much of that labor did you do. But at the least at that point, you've hit the point where human alignment research is not useful anymore. Now, I actually think Miri's pictures, that's not good enough. You need to have like really, really good AIs. I think that's partly because they think the thing you need to eventually do is to build a sovereign, and that like solving alignment is like such that you built a perfect dictator. Whereas I'm a little more like, I'm not sure Lucas is shaking his head. So, okay, well, we can talk about this. Or like, I guess it's a question of like, well, why is alignment so hard, right? And the thought is like, well, in order to solve alignment, you need to something. I think the implicit picture in the book is like, to solve alignment, you need to make it the case that you can build AIs with like perfect motivations, or at least like that's, or at least AIs that are no longer alien in the relevant sense, or something like that. There's some like really deep transition that needs to occur. I tend to think most of what you need to do is you need to build an AI that is ready to build the next layer and the next layer, the next generation. Like you need to pass the baton. And I think mostly we need to pass the baton. Yeah, and I'm hopeful that that can be a kind of incremental level of generalization. I do think if you think that like all the AIs up to like crazy superhuman AIs will be such that they're like, we cannot do this, which I think is like a little bit in there, then this gets tougher. Notably, that's like a problem for any, like that would have been a problem if we had like thousands of years with humans. That's like it's not like there was enough human labor. To some extent, like I'm looking centrally to obsolete human alignment research. Once we have AIs that are strictly dominant, including in terms of alignment, to human alignment researchers, then in some sense, like there's no longer a case for having done more human alignment research.
Definitely adversarial something.
If your AI is like adversarially missing your alignment research, well, you're confident your humans aren't.
Oh yeah, sorry, I meant including with trust. Yeah. So yeah, having AIs that are just merely better than humans at alignment research is not enough. They need to be comparably trustworthy to humans. But once you have an AI where it's just like, for every reason, I would prefer this AI than to a human alignment researcher, then to some extent you've like that's a baton passing point for human alignment researchers. You still could fail, but I think at the least you wouldn't fail from a like we should have done more human alignment research necessarily. I think there is still a question of like whether that's enough. And I think if you think you need to do like a way higher bar and nothing below it helps get you there, then that's a bigger leap of generalization and the problem is harder.
Thanks for your talk. I have the intuition that corrigibility is fragile, and I haven't thought about it as much, but the basic thought is that, well, non-corrigible values just stay non-corrigible. Corrigible values are somewhat open to value change, including changes that make them less corrigible, and this seems to be a non-reversible process. So, like in a limit of like a very long time and very many inputs, shouldn't we just expect all values to converge to non-corrigibility?
I think it depends on like the degree of optimization, or like, I don't know, there's like a sort of very, very long, like, if you assume like crazy selection over the space of possible some things. Like I feel you can make a similar argument for like, I don't know. Like basically I worry about neglecting the like we can try to design, like we can take our corrigible AIs and be like, can you help us make the next generation corrigible and like help improve our science in this respect? And so you need to balance, like to whatever extent there's sort of some sort of default pressure away from corrigibility that needs to be balanced against like the pressure towards it that we're able to exert. I also think we can use corrigible AIs to try to get into a whole new regime. Like maybe we can build AIs that are just have good enough values. I also think, I mean, a thing I haven't talked about here is like, so there's a question of like, when have you built a system that is like ready to be dictator of the universe? There's a different question of like, when have you built a system that you trust more than like any human to be dictator of the universe? These are different. And like, it's not, I think it's actually not clear how hard it is to meet the standard of like ethical trust or whatever that you would have in a human versus an AI. I think that there's often an implicit picture that like the deep contingencies of human psychology are going to be the really operative consideration. So even if an AI is like it's possibly not that hard, for example, to build an AI that is like locally kind of more ethical agent than many average humans, right? Like plausibly the like Claude or like the personas right now are quite like, they're quite nice. They're at least not like grumpy in the same way humans are. I don't know. There's like a bunch of like local, and suppose they're not scheming or something. I think there's often the thought that like, no, but the standard of alignment we really care about is not your like local ethics, but like what happens when you foom and become dictator of the universe. But I think it's like, well, anyway, there's when is an AI sort of more aligned than humans in an everyday normal sense, and when is an AI like dictator ready? And I think it's plausible that, and when is an AI more dictator ready than a human? I think getting to the point where you can meet that standard at least is like plausibly not that hard. And so I don't think corrigibility is the only like end state here. Like you can have other potential options, including potentially like sovereign AIs in some sense. Yeah.
So I was a little surprised to hear you use the example of deontological rule like don't self-exfiltrate. I thought you were going in the direction of just pure correctability, which sort of boils down to just follow instructions. Like, here's this guy or this set of people that these instructions are going to follow. Everything else flows out from there. That seems like you're asking it to be one thing instead of multiple things that may conflict, so you're training in opposite directions.
Yeah, so I guess the way I've set up the 4-step approach is like, it's focused on instruction following as a key feature. So you want to ensure instruction following in training, check that there's no scheming, ensure you've got generalization to instruction following on the other inputs you care about, and then final step, have instructions that rule out rogue behavior. I think there is non-trivial, so like, if you want your instructions to be like, make me money, make me arbitrary money in the future or something, which you should not instruct your guys to do probably, then you actually do still need to deal with the corrigibility thing in that context, right? You need to like be like, but don't break the law and like, don't do something I would intuitively disapprove of, et cetera. And so I think, and you know, if you set your AI loose on like, just make me money, and then you go like, wait, then it's like, it's incentivized, for example, for you to like not change your instructions later or whatever. You have to build in your instructions. So I think you do still get the problem, but it's at the level of like, how hard is it to write instructions that ensure adequate corrigibility? And I think that's probably not that hard if they're going to be interpreted intuitively, though it's unclear.
All right. I think we will wrap up.
Yeah. I mean, we got,
We have time for one more question. This is a bit of a, I'm not sure this is a good question, so I'll go fast anyway. Sometimes I got the sense that you were kind of strawmanning the myriad test field. And I think an example of this might be when you were talking about the pickup speeds and the generalization across the gap. And I certainly would appreciate it if you picked on AI 2027 as a concrete example of the type of situation that this might need to apply in, and possibly you'll be able to vindicate your arguments in that context. But yeah, I would encourage you to think about, like, let's say it's halfway through the intelligence explosion, they have an AI system that's relatively similar to the LLMs of today, but with neuralese, perhaps. And it's called Agent 3, and it's basically doing all the research. and it's discovered a new type of architecture that's more human brain inspired, that works in a substantially different way and is like massively more data efficient and better at online learning, etc. And the plan is to switch over to this new architecture and put copies of the new thing in charge of everything. And also, China stole the weights 2 months ago, and so you have like 2 months to get this working. Go, go, go. You know, that's the sort of generalization gap that you kind of want to be able to cross on the first critical try, because you have to be like reasoning about this new system that you only invented last week that works differently from the current system, and your bosses are telling you that we're going to make 1 million copies of it and put it in charge of the research as soon as possible, you know, and then it's going to, you know, go on, blah, 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 blah. So like a situation like that is like, I think, helpful to describe as like the sort of thing that we actually seem to be headed towards. And yeah, so you can either reject that and say, no, 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 I think takeoff is going to be slower than that. It's going to take place over several years, not, you know, there won't be any paradigm shifts like that happening in the middle of takeoff. Or you can be like, yep, something like that will be happening, and we want our alignment techniques to like generalize across that gap. And we want like,
Yeah, I appreciate this question. I think it's totally, I've been playing fast and loose in my characterization of the argument and the broad like mirror picture of this. There's a bunch of subtlety here. I think it's possibly, I want to sort of like communicate some like suspicions I have as to like underlying generators of ways in which this discourse might be like inflected with some aspects that are off. But that's, you're right there. You're right. I've been playing fast and loose, and I think there's like there's more to say there. I think so if we're thinking that the problem is that this generalization is going to be involving of a new, like a fundamentally new paradigm, I think that's a great reason to be worried that like things that helped with safety in the old paradigm won't work anymore. I think that's like a more, that's a more specific picture, right? Like I think, and in some sense, a new paradigm is, and I worry about this a little insofar as maybe I worry sometimes there's a little bit of inflection of like there has to be a new paradigm because the current thing is missing the deep core of intelligence or something like that, and I'm like, I worry about that. So like my default is something like there can be a fast takeoff, but if it's sort of you're doing the same techniques, roughly speaking, and you're like learning a bunch about how ML works in general, then I agree that all things are very scary because they're moving very fast and because China stole the weights and et cetera, et cetera. But that's normally the scenario I'm thinking about is a little bit more like that. It's like we're the type of AIs we need to align are like in the rough paradigm that we're currently working in. And then if we're going to do a new paradigm, it's a lot harder to say exactly how the safety thing goes, and we need to actually have done the relevant science before that. I still think you can get like AI 2027 style worries, like even if your story ran without any paradigm shift, but was just like you just amp up on like ML and RL and et cetera. I think you can definitely get scared there. I think my version would probably be like you make a capability leap, and then that's when scheming hits, and so your scheming starts concurrent with a like an increase the next scale up of capability or something like that, and then your science starts to fail. Meanwhile, you have like your generalization can't be like studied in the same way, and I just think that is scary. I think this is like a scary situation. I'm not saying it's fine. I mostly want to like emphasize the details of the importance of us attending to the like specific type of generalization we need to get right. And I think in an incremental world, you can try to like minimize the steps at like the amount of generalization you're doing at each step and make it as continuous as possible with the stuff you've studied before. Cool. Thank you, everybody. Happy to chat more about this. I'll be around. And like I said, I have an essay online that goes into this argument in more detail. So feel free to check that out.